This past February, we had a deep freeze, and when that happened, a lot of people were concerned about the effects that it would have on our landscape. And I was concerned too, but really the only thing we could do was to wait and see. Well, we're a few months away from that February freeze, and the temperatures have warmed up as well as the soil temperatures. So we're starting to see some life come back into our plants. Now, it might not be full on like we normally expect, and so that's what we're going to do, is evaluate some of those plants in our landscape to determine what we need to do. In some cases, we can cut them back, and unfortunately, in some cases, that means pulling those plants out. And in some cases, it means that they actually came through just fine and regrew just as good as they always do. Today, we're looking at Aucuba here in front of me. We've also got some Abelias, Nandinas, and Mahonia, and all of these really are going to be treated in the same manner. They typically are an evergreen plant, and as you can see, a lot of that foliage did get burned back. Now, in this particular one, the Aucuba, if we're looking at it, you can see where there's definitely some dead tissue as it's all black. You can also see where there's still green viable tissue. Unfortunately, on most of this, the green stems, we're not really seeing any regrowth. Where we're seeing the growth come back from is down at the base of this plant. So for this situation, what we're going to go ahead and do is take this plant all the way back, leaving this new growth to regenerate and fill in. And that's what we're going to do on a lot of our plants. But first we'll tackle this one here. Now that we've got our Aucubas cleaned up here, one thing you want to be careful of is make sure you're not throwing away any of your plant labels. So if you have removed any of your branches and those are still attached, make sure you've got that written down, take a picture of it or something so that you remember what these plants are in your garden before those head to the compost pile. So next here we've got some Abelias. Again, you can see that there's some regrowth coming up here on top, but it's very little amount of regrowth. The majority of it is all dead tissue. There's a lot more regrowth down at the base of the plant where it stayed warmer. So at this point, we're going to take all of these back to the ground. You can see there's about 3 large ones, and that's just going to give it a more regenerative pruning as well, and also help maintain that size of that plant. So we've got a lot of the dead cleaned out of these shrubs here, and we're going to treat our Mahonias and our Carya japonica the same way. You also might find that your crepe myrtles have died back, and if you're already starting to see regrowth coming up from the base, then it's time to go ahead and prune those all the way back to the ground too, and allow that new growth to continue to rejuvenate the plant. You might find that in some locations your crepe myrtles are still regrowing from the top, in which you don't necessarily have to prune them. It depends on, again, the location around the state and also the microclimate. I've seen on different sides of the building where some crepe myrtles have died all the way back to the base, and then on the other side of the building, they're still regrowing from the top. It just depends. So now over here you can see we have an Indian hawthorn, and there's actually part of this plant that's still alive around the base that was naturally covered by the organic matter and the leaf litter that was there over the winter months. But for the bulk of it, you can see that it is kind of dead. And because we are at a botanical garden, we obviously want to put our best foot forward and make it pleasant for everyone to enjoy aesthetically. And so here we're sort of evaluating the plant and have determined that it's just best to go ahead and remove it because it is a slow grower. So we're going to remove this one. Now, if this was in your backyard and you wanted to go ahead and wait and you didn't want to purchase another plant and you want to invest time rather than money, there's no reason you couldn't prune this back and try to wait for it to regrow. It's just going to take a little bit of time. Now, some of the other plants that we are seeing around the garden showing effects are live oaks and our Nelliar Stevens. We're excited to see they are regrowing and they're starting to push out new leaves. So even though they were evergreen, they turned brown, we're seeing new growth come back out on those. So those we don't have to do anything to. Now on herbaceous plants, our cannas are actually coming back. I know, especially in northern Oklahoma, some people might have lost their cannas. Again, depending on how aggressive of a stand those cannas were, and also how much debris was maybe covering and mulching those cannas through that freeze. Another plant that we're seeing that didn't do so well are our azaleas. Here in north central Oklahoma, they didn't seem to come out of it so well, and we saw a lot of loss from them. However, I know over in Tulsa they had a beautiful spring display of azaleas. So again, it depends on where you were in the state as to those freeze temperatures and how long exposure they might have had to those cold temperatures. Another plant that we have struggled with seeing regrowth on is our deodar cedars, unfortunately. They are still not looking good, so it looks like that they might need to be pulled as well. But just keep in mind that if you have plants kind of like our Indian hawthorn that we're going to go ahead and take out, or our deodar cedars, that every time you have to pull a plant, that's just an opportunity to plant something new.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.